Well guys, this is it. This is the video that introduces the latest addition to the Topher fleet. This is my new Lexus GX 460. It's a 2012, it has 131,000 miles on it. And before we get started with the POV video, let me give you just a little bit of backstory on why I purchased this and kind of where my head's been at this last few months after I sold my two Miatas. I had been shopping for a 4th, 5th gen 4Runner, FJ Cruiser, maybe a Tacoma. I wanted something that was a truck, that was heavy duty, that could tow, that could go over potholes and rough roads with ease, and be really comfortable on long trips. I've been planning to do a bunch of long road trips this summer. So I finally kind of got into Toyota Land Cruiser, Lexus GX, researching the Prado, out in Europe and overseas. And I was like, this might be a really good way to go for about the same money or less than an FJ or a 4Runner. And basically, I test drove this at Meade Lexus in Southfield and was immediately sold. This is originally an Oklahoma car, so it has very little rust, and only spent 2 years in Ann Arbor. So it's got some hard Ann Arbor road miles on it, but other than that, it's mostly been driven on the highways, which is when you're buying a high mileage used car, that's what you want because it really reduces the wear and tear on all the components. And the number of times that the vehicle's been started and stopped and cycled through with temperature and everything is vastly reduced if it's mostly a highway mile vehicle. So this GX averaged about 18,000 miles a year. It's a 2012 with 131,000 miles on it. So pretty high mileage for what it is, but it drives just as well as the 2018 that I tested 2 weeks ago. Anyway, without further ado, that's kind of some backstory on why I bought this, why I have this big SUV now instead of little tiny sports cars like I always have. But yeah, let's take this thing for a drive and I'll show you around it before that. But this isn't going to be some vast, crazy overland build. This is a daily driver. This is a nice, classy, quiet, and comfortable vehicle that maybe someday I'll throw a lift kit on and some knobby tires. But for now, it's going to do winter duty and road trip duty, and it is perfect for that as it sits. I'm really excited to show you guys around this thing. So, first of all, I will say that this is one of my favorite vehicles I've ever owned. The goal with this was to get into something that wasn't that much money, that I wouldn't lose out too much on depreciation. And for me, I feel like this 2012 GX is kind of a sweet spot in there because it's modern enough to have Bluetooth and navigation and all these great features in the infotainment. This is the premium, so it has the air suspension, the adjustable sport to comfort modes, ride height selector, and of course it's full-time four-wheel drive, made into a 6-speed transmission with a 4.6-liter V8, 301 horsepower, and I believe 329 pound-feet of torque. So pretty meaty power plant. Not a ton of torque at low revs, but definitely once you get up there in the high revs, it gets you going. So brand new, this GX was around 65 grand. I paid 25 for it. Not a bad deal. I put like $3,000 down. My payment's about $430 a month. So it really didn't cost me a whole lot. And if I want to sell this in a few years, I could put 100,000 miles on this thing and probably get 16 to 18,000 for it. And I'd still be in pretty good shape. So what all did this GX need? I've already told you it pretty much drives exactly like the brand new one that I just tested a few weeks ago. That was a $50,000 truck, and that was a base model. It needed new tires. A couple of the tires were flat spotted, and they just weren't balancing correctly. So I put new tires on it. These will work really well in the winter. They weren't that expensive. It was all about $650 all in, including a rebate. And then I needed a couple things done. I changed all the fluids throughout the vehicle. The front differential, rear differential, transfer case, transmission fluid. I did a drain and fill, as well as changed the engine oil and all that stuff. So all fresh fluids, greased the yokes, filled the Zerks with more grease, and everything is nice and tight. The transmission and drivetrain feel awesome in this GX. It also needed some sway bar bushings, front and rear. They were just completely worn out, and that really tightened up the feel of the suspension. There was just a little bit of a looseness over bumps. All said, all those repairs at my trusty local mechanic were only about $600. And back here, something I didn't mention in my last video, you do have this option to open the tailgate from the window, which is kind of cool. And of course, the classic opening here. I've got some tools and whatnot in my gun rack compartment, as well as a high visibility jacket, which is always necessary. And yeah, that about sums it up. 6,500 pound towing capacity for if I ever want to tow a race car. This thing pretty much serves all my needs of a daily driver, an SUV, and just a really, really solid winter vehicle. I wanted something that was just a little bit bigger on the road because everyone in Michigan drives SUVs. Let's take this thing for a drive and kind of talk a little bit about what it's like behind the wheel. I would say the differences between a brand new GX and one with 130,000 miles on that's been well maintained and well cared for with updated, maintenance and everything. The newer vehicle, it feels newer, it feels fresher, everything's a little bit tighter, everything's a little bit smoother. This has been worn in a little bit, but it's a testament to Lexus's quality that a vehicle can hold up and still feel brand new after 6 years old now, 130,000 miles. A lot of other cars would be starting to show a little bit of wear, a little bit of tear, and this doesn't have a rattle, no noise, no issues. It's had a pretty clean bill of health its entire life as well. The only thing that doesn't work for some reason are the memory seats. It beeps, but it doesn't resume to the set position. So I need to look that up. Maybe it's a module or something. I can troubleshoot that. My favorite thing about this Lexus is that I can drive it for pretty much 5 hours nonstop, an entire tank of gas, without having to stop and get out and rest. You probably should get out and rest every few hours, but if I really, really wanted to, I'm perfectly comfortable driving this thing 4 or 5 hours at a time, and I've never been in a vehicle like that before. The seats are really, really comfortable. The lumbar is a little bit strong, but in the long trips, it just feels fantastic. I like the air suspension on this. I was thinking that the coil setup on the base GX I was driving a few weeks ago was a little bit more comfortable, a little bit more refined, but actually, now that I compare them back to back, this air suspension does ride a little bit better. It just kind of smooths over the bumps a little bit. Maybe it's not as quiet, but it's really, really nice. The coil setup is good as well, but it's a little bit busy. So let's talk a little bit about braking, handling. One of my favorite things about the air suspension is that you can adjust the suspension. You feel how neutral that was back in that corner? We were squealing some tires, but it rotated. This GX handles so much better than an FJ Cruiser. It's unbelievable. FJs are really fun to drive. They are kind of cool to just experience behind the wheel, but they're not good on a back road. And this GX actually does pretty well. You put it into sport mode, you can manually shift. The V8 is nice, and this is just the FJ, the 4Runner, refined, and I really, really love it for that. I leave it in normal most of the time. Comfort mode's pretty smooth, pretty soft, but it gets a little bit floaty. But I really like the ability to adjust the suspension based on the driving condition, and it's a subtle, but I think a meaningful way to kind of just change the personality and character of the car. V8 in this actually sounds pretty good. It's so smooth, and the shifts between gears you barely feel them. It's amazing. For some reason, I feel like this transmission shifts a little bit smoother than the new one that I had. Maybe because it's broken in a little bit more, maybe because I put some redline fluid in there, who knows. But This truck is really, really comfortable, really smooth. The drivetrain on it is quite good. My only complaint is that I would hit some pretty big hills out west, going up mountains, going up, just on the highway, cruising at 75, 80 miles an hour. And when you're in cruise control, it's downshifting like crazy to maintain that speed. And it's almost like the cruise control system overcompensates for the speed that you really need to go. It's funny because if you're just driving without cruise control, it does a pretty good job maintaining the speed without downshifting a lot, with your right foot. But man, I'll tell you, cruise control needs a little bit of reprogramming in these GXs. You can see back there, pretty nimble, not too bad. The brake pedal feel took a little bit of getting used to on this truck. It got a lot better after I bled the brakes. But there's kind of this initial like airy squish to it, and then you start getting some bite. It's all within about a ½ inch of pedal travel, but you do get used to it after some time, and I will say that it has gotten better after I changed the fluid. I do like manually being able to shift through these gears. It's pretty responsive. And as you can see, once you get it past through 3,500, 4,000 RPM, this truck pulls. It pulls quite well. All right, let's do some handling tests here. Not bad for a big old heavy brute. Sport mode, of course. Air suspension on these is only in the rear, so really you're adjusting the characteristic and the stiffness of the rear suspension with this button. But once you put it into comfort, it settles down very well. Another thing I noticed with this GX is that the wind noise level is very, very nice compared to the 4Runner and the FJ on the highway. Lexus they have thicker glass, they have more sound insulation. It's really a nice, quiet experience on the highway. And if you add that up over the miles, it really does make a difference for comfort on long road trips. Honestly, the other reason why I wanted to get this, the Mark Levinson sound system. The sound system in the standard GX is pretty darn good. It's not bad, don't get me wrong. The bass is a little heavy, but you can adjust it. But there's something about this Mark Levinson, the clarity, the fidelity, just the overall sound quality and the experience listening to music is just that much of a step higher. And the Bluetooth, the auxiliary, the connectivity works really well with it. I was also looking at GX 470s, but the prices weren't that much less for the later models of those, and this just has so much more tech, and honestly, it's just it's a more modern vehicle. So that was another really big selling point on this, just the fact that I could get that Mark Levinson for not that much more than a 4Runner or an FJ, and this thing just has so many features, so many luxury, and so many comforts to it. It even has this heated steering wheel and cooled seats down here. That was a really big selling point for me too, especially for winter driving. As you guys know, the heated steering wheel is probably my favorite feature ever in any car when it's 12 degrees out in the morning. You can't beat it. You can hear there's a little bit of tire noise from these Coopers. It's not too bad. Definitely not as quiet as the Michelin. I think they were LTXs that were on this before. But they're a nice tire. They ride well, they handle decently, and they should do a pretty good job in the wintertime. They have a pretty aggressive tread compound. Let's talk a little bit about gas mileage. I mentioned this in my last video, but I've been averaging pretty solidly in this. About 17, 18 miles to the gallon combined between a pretty even mix of city highway driving. And I've been doing on road trips, if I keep it at 70, 75, a solid 22, 23 miles to the gallon. This requires premium gas, so it's a little bit more expensive. And then if I'm cruising at, if I'm hauling, honestly, if I'm going 75, 80, 85, maybe a little bit faster, this will do 19, 20 miles to the gallon all day long, which I'm very, very pleased with. You can't beat that. In a full-time four-wheel drive SUV that's shaped like this, I think that's a pretty good fuel economy number. And, you know, there's a reason why people put so many miles on these trucks. They're so comfortable, they're so easy to drive, they're so just, it's so natural to just rack on the miles with these things. Really, I liken it to a first-class air cabin, airplane experience. And yeah, you're going to pay a little bit more, but you're going to get there so much more comfortably and so much easier. And I think it's worth it. And if you add in the fact that this isn't really going to lose a whole lot of money with depreciation in the next few years, and if I do want to sell it and upgrade to like a LX 570 or maybe even a Toyota Land Cruiser, I could get some of my money back out of this. And I'm also writing this off as a little bit of a business expense too, in some respects. When I'm driving to photo shoots or I'm driving on trips where I'm going to be filming videos, you can do a little bit of a tax deduction on the mileage on these. And mileage deductions are always a good thing. Alright guys, well, that's going to wrap it up for this video. I'll do a night drive at some point, show you guys the headlights and just kind of how this thing is at night, but it's really not all that different from the other GX that I tested. And yeah, I think that about sums it up. Thanks again for watching, guys. We will see you in another video soon. Got some updates on the BRZ coming up. I'm going to be doing a Toyota 86 suspension swap on that, and basically that'll make the BRZ just about perfect. The suspension is kind of the last piece of the puzzle that I was looking to fix, and just I love the new balance, the new 8.6s, and it's almost perfect. So I think that's what we're going to do with the BRZ. Alright guys, well hey, thanks again for watching. We'll see you in another video. Again, take care. We'll talk to you guys later.